How do Arcturians reproduce? The words escape Charles Adams's mouth before he can stop them, leaving Uma, the ethereal Arcturian scientist, utterly speechless. Charles, a human xenobiologist aboard the interstellar research vessel Curiosity, stands frozen in the ship's conference room. He'd activated an Arcturian distress beacon during a routine survey of an abandoned alien outpost on Epsilon Prime, bringing this delegation to their doorstep within hours. Uma's large iridescent eyes widen in shock. Her slender form, draped in shimmering robes, trembles slightly. The other Arcturians in the room bristle, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with agitation. Captain Sarah Chen clears her throat, shooting Charles a warning glance. Dr. Adams, perhaps we should focus on... But Charles, oblivious to the growing tension, presses on. I'm fascinated by interspecies biology, you see. And as omnivores with a partial carnivorous diet, humans have a unique perspective on... A collective gasp ripples through the Arcturian delegation. Uma takes a step back, her speechlessness morphing into visible horror. The Arcturian ambassador, Zorek, slams a six-fingered hand on the conference table. Carnivores? Zorek hisses. You consume... flesh? Charles blinks, confused by their reaction. Well, yes, we're omnivores, actually. We eat both plants and... Barbaric! An Arcturian security officer spits out the word. We demand to leave immediately. Captain Chen jumps in, trying to salvage the situation. Please, let's not be hasty. We have much to discuss and... A violent tremor rocks the ship, cutting her off. Red warning lights bathe the conference room in an ominous glow. Captain! The Curiosity's pilot's voice crackles over the intercom. A massive solar flare just hit us. Both our ship and the Arcturian vessel have sustained damage to their propulsion systems. We're stranded. Silence descends upon the room as the implications sink in. Humans and Arcturians exchange wary glances, now forced into an uneasy coexistence. Captain Chen takes a deep breath. Dr. Adams, given your expertise, I'm assigning you to work with Uma on repairing the Arcturian ship. We need to mend this situation, on all fronts. Charles nods, acutely aware of the weight now resting on his shoulders. He turns to Uma, extending a hand in a gesture of peace. I apologize for my insensitivity earlier. I hope we can move past this and work together. Uma recoils from his outstretched hand, her gaze fixed on his teeth. Work with a... carnivore? How can I trust you won't... eat me? Charles's jaw drops. I would never... That's not how... Captain Chen interjects. The damage to both ships is extensive. We could be stranded together for weeks, possibly months. We must find a way to cooperate. As the gravity of the situation settles over the room, Charles realizes the fate of human Arcturian relations may hinge on his ability to navigate this delicate situation with Uma. Despite their significant cultural and biological differences, he's determined to bridge the gap. Uma reluctantly nods, her posture still rigid with fear. Very well, we shall attempt to work together. But know this, human. I'll be watching you closely. Charles swallows hard, knowing that every interaction, every word could make or break this fragile alliance. With the eyes of both species upon them, Charles and Uma prepare to embark on a journey of repair and reconciliation, their success far from guaranteed. Charles took a deep breath, acutely aware of Uma's piercing gaze as they made their way to the Curiosity's engineering bay. The air between them crackled with tension, each step echoing in the corridor like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. As they entered the bay, the hum of machinery filled the silence. Charles gestured toward a damaged console, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. Shall we start here? Uma nodded stiffly, her iridescent eyes never leaving Charles's hands. They worked side by side, the occasional brush of arms causing Uma to flinch away. Charles bit back a sigh, focusing on the task at hand. Suddenly, the ship lurched. The artificial gravity flickered, and Uma lost her footing. Without thinking, Charles reached out, catching her before she fell. For a moment, they froze, Uma's cool skin against Charles's palms, their eyes locked in mutual surprise. Uma jerked away, smoothing her shimmering robes. Thank you, she said, her voice a mix of confusion and lingering fear. Charles stepped back, giving her space. You're welcome. I'm sorry if I startled you. I just reacted instinctively. Uma tilted her head, studying him. Instinctively? To help, not to consume? Charles blinked, then understanding dawned. Oh, no. Uma, when I said humans are omnivores, I didn't mean we eat sentient beings. We primarily consume plants with some animal protein, but we're perfectly capable of living on a plant-based diet. Uma's bioluminescent skin pulsed with curiosity. Truly, your people do not require flesh to survive? Not at all, Charles assured her. In fact, many humans choose to be vegetarians or vegans. As they resumed their work, the ice began to thaw. Uma peppered Charles with questions about human dietary habits, and he found himself equally fascinated by Arcturian biology. So your bioluminescence? Charles ventured, carefully adjusting a power coupling. Is it tied to your emotional state? Uma's skin rippled with soft blues and greens. Yes, it's an integral part of our communication and other processes. Charles's ears perked up at the hesitation in her voice. Other processes? Uma's luminescence shifted to a rosy hue. Well, since you asked about reproduction earlier, our mating rituals involve complex bioluminescent displays and pheromone exchanges. Charles' eyes widened with professional curiosity. Fascinating. The interplay between light signals and chemical communication must be incredibly intricate. As they delved deeper into their discussion, comparing notes on xenobiology, the initial awkwardness faded. They barely noticed the hours slipping by until Dr. Samantha Chen burst into the engineering bay, her face etched with worry. Charles, Uma, we've got a problem, she announced, her voice tight. The damage to both ships is far worse than we thought. We don't have the materials we need for repairs on board. Charles frowned. What are our options? Dr. Chen ran a hand through her short, dark hair. The only viable solution is to send an expedition to the surface of Epsilon Prime. We need to search that abandoned alien outpost where you found the distress beacon, Charles. There might be materials we can salvage. Uma's skin pulsed with concern. But the relationship between our people is still so fragile. How can we coordinate such an expedition? As if on cue, Captain Thompson's voice crackled over the intercom. Dr. Adams, Uma, please report to the conference room immediately. We have a situation to discuss. They hurried to the conference room, finding it filled with tense faces from both crews. Captain Thompson stood at the head of the table, his expression grave. Given our circumstances, he began, I'm proposing a joint human-Arcturian expedition to the planet's surface. Ambassador Xylith bristled. After the offense we've endured, you expect us to trust you on an alien world? Captain Thompson held up a placating hand. I understand your concerns, Ambassador. That's why I'm suggesting Uma join the expedition as the Arcturian representative. All eyes turned to Uma. Charles found himself holding his breath, hoping she would agree. Uma straightened her shoulders. I will go, she said firmly. I volunteer for the human contingent, Charles added quickly. Captain Thompson nodded. Excellent. Now there's one more complication. Our scans have detected trace amounts of a gas in the planet's atmosphere. It's mildly toxic to humans, but potentially lethal to Arcturians. A murmur of concern rippled through the room. Charles' mind raced, considering and discarding ideas until, I have a solution, he announced. All eyes turned to him. We can develop a specialized biosuit for Uma, using a combination of our technologies. It would protect her from the atmosphere and regulate her body functions. Uma's skin flickered with a mix of apprehension and intrigue. Is such a thing possible? Charles met her gaze, dedication clear in his eyes. With your help, yes, we can do this, Uma. As the room erupted into discussion, Charles and Uma shared a look of understanding. They had a long road ahead, filled with challenges both technical and cultural. But in that moment, surrounded by the buzz of two species working together, Charles felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this crisis could be the catalyst for something greater than either of them had imagined. The tension in the conference room slowly dissipated as the gravity of their shared predicament sank in. Charles and Uma exchanged a glance, both aware of the monumental task that lay ahead. As the meeting concluded, Captain Thompson pulled Charles aside. "Dr. Adams, I need you to lead the expedition to the surface," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Your expertise in xenobiology and your unique rapport with Uma make you our best option." Charles nodded, his mind already racing with preparations. "Understood, Captain. When do we leave?" "As soon as possible. Assemble your team and be ready to depart in 2 hours." As Charles turned to leave, he found Uma waiting for him near the door. Her bioluminescent skin pulsed with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "I heard," she said softly. "We're going to the surface together." Charles offered a reassuring smile. "Yes, and we'll make it work. We've come this far, haven't we?" Uma's skin flickered with a hint of humor. "Indeed, though I never imagined I'd be venturing onto an alien world with a carnivore." Charles chuckled, grateful for the lightening mood. "Don't worry, I packed plenty of vegetables." The next 2 hours passed in a flurry of activity. Charles and Uma worked side by side, fine-tuning the biosuit that would protect her from the planet's toxic atmosphere. Their hands brushed occasionally, each touch sending a small jolt through Charles. He couldn't help but notice the way Uma's skin pulsed with soft blues and greens when they were in close proximity. As they boarded the shuttle with the rest of the expedition team, Dr. Samantha Chen, engineer Marcus Rodriguez, and Arcturians Zill and Vox, Charles felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The descent to Epsilon Prime was smooth, the abandoned alien outpost growing larger in the viewscreen. Upon landing, the team split into pairs as planned. Charles and Uma made their way to the eastern section of the facility, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous alien structure. "This place is incredible," Charles breathed, running his hand along a wall covered in intricate, swirling patterns. "I wonder who built it." Uma's eyes darted around, taking in every detail. The architecture suggests a highly advanced civilization, but why did they leave? Their musings were cut short by a sudden whirring sound. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing a cluster of menacing-looking devices. "Automated defenses!" Uma cried out, her skin flashing warning colors. Charles reacted instantly, pushing Uma behind a nearby pillar as energy beams lanced through the air where they had been standing. He found himself pressed against her, acutely aware of her rapid breathing and the pulsing of her bioluminescent skin. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice husky with adrenaline. Uma nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, thanks to you. But how do we get past this?" Charles studied the defense system, noting the patterns in its firing sequence. "I think I can disable it, but I'll need your help. Can you use your bioluminescence to distract it while I work on the control panel?" Uma's skin rippled with persistence. "I can do better than that. Watch." She stepped out from behind the pillar, her entire body glowing with an intense pulsating light. The defense system's sensors seemed to struggle to lock onto her, its beams firing wildly. Charles seized the opportunity, darting to the control panel. His fingers flew over the alien interface, applying everything he knew about xenotechnology. With a final push of a button, the defenses powered down. Uma's glow faded as she joined Charles at the panel. "Impressive work," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "We make a good team," Charles replied, grinning. As they continued deeper into the facility, Charles and Uma encountered more challenges. They navigated through rooms filled with strange, pulsating energy fields and corridors that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Each obstacle required them to combine their knowledge and skills, bringing them closer together with every success. During one particularly tense moment, as they were crossing a narrow bridge over a chasm of swirling energy, the structure began to crumble. Charles, bringing up the rear, saw Uma stumble as a section of the bridge gave way beneath her feet. Without thinking, he lunged forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her to safety. The momentum sent them both tumbling to the ground on the other side of the chasm, Charles landing on top of Uma. For a moment they lay there, hearts pounding, bodies pressed together. Charles found himself lost in Uma's iridescent eyes, acutely aware of the coolness of her skin against his. Uma's skin pulsed with a rosy hue. "Charles," she whispered, her voice filled with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Before either of them could say more, a low rumble shook the facility. They scrambled to their feet, both flustered by the intimate moment they had shared. "We should keep moving," Charles said, his voice slightly shaky. Uma nodded, her skin still glowing with that intriguing rosy color. "Yes, we must find those repair materials." As they pressed on, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Every glance, every accidental touch seemed charged with new meaning. Their search led them to a hidden chamber, its walls lined with unfamiliar technology. In the center of the room stood a device unlike anything Charles had ever seen. "What is it?" Uma asked, her voice filled with wonder. Charles approached the device cautiously. "I'm not sure, but it looks like some kind of communication technology. Maybe a translator?" As they examined the device, Charles' hand accidentally brushed against a control panel. A soft hum filled the air, and suddenly, Charles felt a strange sensation wash over him. He gasped as his mind was flooded with a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. He could feel Uma's presence in his thoughts, her alien perceptions blending with his own. "Uma!" he called out, both aloud and in his mind. "Charles!" her voice echoed in his head, filled with awe and a hint of fear. "What's happening to us?" "Us." Uma's thoughts resonated in Charles' mind, a mix of wonder and apprehension coloring her mental voice. The sensation was unlike anything Charles had ever experienced. He could feel Uma's alien consciousness intertwining with his own, her thoughts and emotions washing over him in waves of color and light. It was as if he could see through her eyes, perceiving the world in an entirely new spectrum. I think this device is translating more than just language," Charles said aloud, his voice trembling with excitement. "It's allowing us to share our perceptions, our very thoughts." Uma's skin pulsed with a kaleidoscope of colors, reflecting the intensity of her emotions. "This is incredible, Charles. I can feel your curiosity, your wonder, your warmth." They stood there for a moment, lost in the shared experience, before the urgency of their mission reasserted itself. Charles reluctantly deactivated the device, the connection fading but leaving a lingering sense of intimacy between them. "We should take this back to the ships," Charles said, carefully disconnecting the translator from its housing. "This could revolutionize communication between our species." Uma nodded, her skin still shimmering with residual excitement. "Agreed, and we must hurry. The others will be wondering where we are." As they made their way back through the alien facility, Charles couldn't help but notice how differently he perceived Uma now. Every flicker of her bioluminescence seemed to carry new meaning, every gesture laden with unspoken communication. They emerged from the outpost to find the rest of the expedition team waiting anxiously by the shuttle. Dr. Chen rushed forward, relief evident on her face. "Where have you two been?" she demanded. "We've been trying to contact you for hours." Charles held up the translator device. "We found something, Samantha, something that could change everything." The journey back to the Curiosity was tense, filled with excited whispers and speculation about the alien technology. As they docked, Charles and Uma exchanged a glance, both aware that their experience in the outpost had altered something fundamental between them. They were immediately summoned to the conference room, where Captain Thompson and Ambassador Xylith awaited them with stern expressions. The room crackled with tension as Charles and Uma stood before the assembled leaders. "Dr. Adams, Uma," Captain Thompson began, his voice tight with hardly restrained anger. "You were gone for hours beyond the planned expedition time. You failed to respond to communications. Explain yourselves." Charles stepped forward, holding out the translator device. "Captain, Ambassador, we discovered something extraordinary. This device, it's not just a translator. It allows for a complete sharing of thoughts and perceptions between species." Ambassador Xylith's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "And you took it upon yourselves to test this alien technology without authorization?" Uma's skin pulsed with determined hues. "With respect, Ambassador, we saw an opportunity to advance our understanding and took it. The potential benefits far outweigh the risks." Captain Thompson leaned forward, his interest piqued despite his earlier anger. Show us. Charles activated the device, and suddenly the room was awash in a symphony of thoughts and emotions. Humans and Arcturians alike gasped as they experienced each other's perceptions for the first time. For a brief, shining moment, the tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a sense of wonder and possibility. But as the effect faded, Charles noticed Ambassador Xylith studying Uma intently, her expression unreadable. "This is indeed a remarkable discovery," Captain Thompson admitted, his earlier anger softening. "But it doesn't excuse your reckless behavior. We'll need to conduct thorough tests before we can consider using this technology more widely." As the meeting concluded, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irrevocably. He caught Uma's eye across the room, sensing her unease. They had crossed a line, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Dr. Chen approached them as they left the conference room. "I need you both in the lab," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We've analyzed the minerals you brought back. They're exactly what we need for repairs, but it's going to take at least 2 weeks to complete the work." Charles nodded, his mind racing with the implications. 2 more weeks of close quarters, 2 more weeks of navigating this new, complex dynamic between humans and Arcturians, between himself and Uma. As they made their way to the lab, Charles felt Uma's cool hand brush against his. He looked at her, seeing the swirl of emotions in her bioluminescent patterns. "Charles," she said softly, "what happened down there? It changes things, doesn't it?" He nodded, acutely aware of the weight of their shared experience. "Yes, it does, but we'll figure it out together." As they entered the lab, ready to begin their work on integrating the translator technology, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something much larger than themselves. The universe had just become a whole lot more complicated and infinitely more interesting. Fascinating. The possibilities seemed endless, yet fraught with potential dangers. Their musings were cut short by a sudden blaring of alarms. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors as Captain Thompson's voice came over the intercom. "All hands to battle stations. Unidentified vessel approaching." Charles and Uma exchanged a worried glance before rushing to their assigned posts. As they ran, Charles couldn't help but notice the rapid color changes rippling across Uma's skin, reflecting her anxiety and excitement. The bridge was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Captain Thompson stood at the center, his face grim as he studied the main view screen. A sleek, unfamiliar ship was rapidly closing in on their position. "Status report," Thompson barked. "Unknown vessel is not responding to hails," the communications officer reported. "No match in our database, sir." Ambassador Xylith burst onto the bridge, her normally composed demeanor shaken. "Captain, I demand you allow our delegation to return to our ship immediately. We cannot risk being trapped here if hostilities break out." Thompson turned to face her, his expression hard. "With all due respect, Ambassador, we're safer together right now. We don't know who's out there or what they want." Charles watched the exchange, acutely aware of Uma's presence beside him. He could sense her inner conflict, torn between her duty to her people and their newfound connection. The tension on the bridge ratcheted up as the mysterious ship drew closer. Then, unexpectedly, a transmission came through. "Attention vessels in distress." A calm, melodious voice filled the bridge. "This is Dr. Lyra of the research vessel Harmony. We come in peace and offer assistance." A collective sigh of relief swept through the crew, but Captain Thompson remained cautious. "This is Captain Thompson of the Earthship Curiosity. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a being unlike any Charles had ever seen. Dr. Lyra appeared vaguely humanoid, but her skin shimmered with an otherworldly iridescence, and her eyes held depths of wisdom that seemed ancient beyond measure. "We are the Harmonizers," Dr. Lyra explained, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "We created the outpost you recently explored, as well as the universal translator you discovered. Our mission is to study and promote cooperation between species across the galaxy." Charles felt Uma stiffen beside him, her skin pulsing with a mix of awe and trepidation. He fought the urge to reach out and comfort her, aware of the scrutiny they were under. Captain Thompson considered Dr. Lyra's words carefully before responding. "We appreciate your offer of assistance, Dr. Lyra. However, you understand our caution. We've never encountered your species before." "Of course, Captain," Lyra nodded. "We would like to request permission to board your vessel. We bring advanced medical and repair technologies that could be of great help to you." Thompson glanced at Ambassador Xylith, who gave a reluctant nod. "Very well," he said. "You may board, but be aware that we will be taking security precautions." As preparations were made to receive the harmonizers, Charles and Uma found themselves once again in the thick of things. Dr. Chen approached them, her eyes gleaming with scientific curiosity. "I want you two there when we meet them," she said. "Your experience with the translator might be crucial." The docking bay was a hive of activity as the harmonizer shuttle arrived. Security teams stood at the ready as the airlock cycled open, revealing Dr. Lyra and her team. Up close, the harmonizers were even more striking. Their bodies seemed to shimmer and shift, as if they were only partially anchored in this reality. Dr. Lyra's gaze immediately fell on Charles and Uma, a knowing smile playing across her face. "Ah," she said, approaching them. "You must be the ones who activated our translator. I can sense the change in you already." Charles felt a mixture of fascination and unease. "What do you mean by change?" Dr. Lyra's eyes sparkled. "The translator does more than just convey language. It facilitates a deeper understanding between species, even on a biological level. You two have started down a path few have traveled before." Uma's skin rippled with a complex pattern of colors. "Is that why I've been experiencing these unusual reactions?" "Precisely," Lyra nodded. "With your permission, I'd like to examine you both. Our medical technology can provide insights your current science cannot." Before they could respond, Ambassador Xylith stepped forward, her voice sharp. "I must object. We cannot allow unknown aliens to experiment on our people." Captain Thompson held up a hand. "Let's not be hasty, Ambassador. Dr. Lyra, perhaps you could first assist with our repairs. We can discuss further examinations after we've had a chance to know each other better." Dr. Lyra inclined her head gracefully. "Of course, Captain. We are here to help, not to impose. Shall we begin with a tour of your engine room?" As the group moved off, Charles and Uma lingered behind. Charles could sense Uma's turmoil, her skin fluctuating between colors of excitement and fear. "What do you think about all this?" he asked softly. Uma's iridescent eyes met his. "I'm not sure, Charles. Part of me is thrilled at the possibilities, but another part is terrified. What if this changes us in ways we can't undo?" Charles nodded, understanding her concerns all too well. "We'll face it together, whatever happens. For now, let's focus on getting the ships repaired." As they hurried to catch up with the others, neither of them noticed Ambassador Xylith watching them intently, her expression unreadable. The arrival of the harmonizers had set in motion events that would test not only Charles and Uma's bond, but the very future of human-Arcturian relations. In the engine room, Dr. Lyra and her team worked with an efficiency that bordered on the miraculous. Their tools, seemingly simple at first glance, manipulated energy and matter in ways that left even the most seasoned engineers speechless. Charles and Uma found themselves assisting, their unique connection allowing them to bridge the gap between human, Arcturian, and harmonizer technologies. As they worked, Dr. Lyra explained more about their mission. "The universe is vast and full of wonders," she said, her hands moving in complex patterns over a damaged power coupling. "But it can also be terribly lonely. We believe that true progress, true harmony, can only be achieved when species learn to understand and appreciate each other on the deepest levels." Uma's skin pulsed with curiosity. "Is that why you created the translator?" Dr. Lyra smiled. "It's one of our tools, yes. But what you two have experienced goes beyond mere translation. You've begun to bridge the gap between your species in a way that few have ever achieved." Before Charles could ask for clarification, alarms blared once again. Captain Thompson's voice came over the intercom, tension evident in his tone. "All hands, be advised. A patrol of Arcturian warships has just entered the system. They're demanding explanations for our presence here. Senior staff, report to the bridge immediately." Charles and Uma exchanged a worried glance. The situation had just become far more complicated, and they were at the center of it all. As they hurried to the bridge, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something that would change not just their lives, but the course of interstellar relations forever. As Charles and Uma rushed to the bridge, the tension in the air was palpable. The arrival of Arcturian warships had thrown their already precarious situation into further chaos. When they arrived, Captain Thompson was engaged in a heated exchange with a stern-faced Arcturian on the main view screen. "Admiral Vex," Thompson said, his voice strained but composed. "I assure you, our presence here is not a threat to Arcturian sovereignty." The Arcturian admiral's eyes narrowed. "Your assurances mean little, Captain. You will explain yourselves in person. Prepare to receive transport coordinates for yourself, the Arcturian ambassador, and the leader of this new species." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Captain Thompson turned to Dr. Lyra, who had been observing the exchange with a serene expression. "It seems we're needed elsewhere, Doctor," Thompson said grimly. "Ambassador Xylith, if you would join us?" As the three leaders prepared to depart, Charles couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He glanced at Uma, noticing the rapid color changes across her skin that betrayed her own anxiety. "What do we do now?" Uma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Charles could respond, Dr. Chen approached them, her eyes gleaming with a mix of concern and grit. "You two," she said, gesturing for them to follow her. "Come with me. We don't have much time." Confused but intrigued, Charles and Uma followed Dr. Chen to her lab. Once inside, she activated a privacy field and turned to face them. "The harmonizers left behind some of their equipment," Dr. Chen explained, indicating a strange, shimmering device in the corner of the lab. "I've been studying it, and I believe it's capable of enhancing your unique connection." Charles felt a jolt of excitement mingled with apprehension. "You mean, make us more like each other?" Dr. Chen nodded. "Precisely. It's risky, and I can't predict all the outcomes. But given the current situation, this could be our best chance at bridging the gap between our species." Uma's skin pulsed with a mix of vibrant colors. "I'm willing to try," she said, her voice firm. "Charles?" He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Let's do it." As Dr. Chen prepared the equipment, Charles and Uma exchanged a long look, silently acknowledging the magnitude of their decision. They lay down on adjacent beds and Dr. Chen activated the harmonizer device. The sensation was unlike anything Charles had ever experienced. It felt as if every cell in his body was being rewritten, realigned to a new pattern. He could sense Uma's presence more strongly than ever, their minds intertwining in ways he couldn't have imagined. When the process finally ended, Charles sat up, blinking in the suddenly too bright lights of the lab. He looked down at his arms, startled to see faint, shimmering patches on his skin that pulsed with color. Uma gasped beside him. "Charles, your eyes." He turned to her and felt another shock. Uma's features had subtly changed, becoming more recognizably human while still retaining her alien beauty. Dr. Chen approached them, scanner in hand. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Your physiologies have aligned significantly. Charles, you've developed bioluminescent capabilities, and Uma, your digestive system has adapted to process a wider range of nutrients." Before they could fully process these changes, an alert sounded. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she read the incoming message. "They're calling for you," she said urgently. "Admiral Vex wants to see you both immediately." Heart pounding, Charles reached for Uma's hand. As their fingers intertwined, he felt a surge of shared emotion, excitement, fear, and a deep sense of connection. They made their way to the shuttle bay, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Some crew members looked at them with wonder, others with barely concealed revulsion. As they boarded the shuttle to the Arcturian flagship, Charles caught sight of Captain Thompson's stunned expression. "What have you done?" Thompson asked, his voice a mix of awe and concern. "What was necessary?" Charles replied, surprised by the calm certainty in his voice. The journey to the Arcturian ship was tense and silent. When they arrived, they were immediately escorted to the bridge, where Admiral Vex awaited them. The Admiral's eyes widened as he took in their transformed appearance. What is the meaning of this? He demanded. Charles stepped forward, feeling Uma's steady presence beside him. Admiral, he began, his voice resonating with a new depth of understanding, we represent the possibility of true cooperation between our species. As if to demonstrate, Charles and Uma joined hands. The bridge of the Arcturian ship lit up with a dazzling display of bioluminescence, a visual representation of their shared thoughts and emotions. Admiral Vex stared, his stern demeanor cracking. This changes everything, he muttered. But before the implications could be fully discussed, alarms blared across the ship. A young Arcturian officer rushed to Admiral Vex's side. Sir, the officer reported, voice tight with urgency, long-range sensors have detected an approaching fleet. The harmonizers identify them as the Voidborn. A hush fell over the bridge, broken only by Dr. Lyra's soft voice. The Voidborn are a grave threat to us all, she said. They seek to harvest the technology of other species, destroying all in their path. Admiral Vex's expression hardened. He looked at the assembled group, human, Arcturian, harmonizer, and the two who now bridge the gap between species. It seems, he said slowly, that we face a common enemy. Captain Thompson, Dr. Lyra, I propose we combine our forces. As the leaders began to strategize, Charles and Uma found themselves at the center of a rapidly forming coalition. Their unique abilities made them ideal for coordinating communication between the different ships. As they took their positions, Uma's hand found Charles's once more. Through their enhanced connection, he could feel her willpower matching his own. The Voidborn fleet drew closer, a dark mass of ships that seemed to devour the very light of the stars. Charles and Uma stood ready, their interspecies bond about to face its greatest test. The battle for survival was about to begin. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. As the first volley of Voidborn energy weapons lit up the darkness of space, Charles and Uma sprang into action. They rushed to the Curiosity's command center, their newly enhanced bodies moving with fluid grace. Incoming transmission from Admiral Vex, announced a communications officer, her voice tight with tension. Charles and Uma stepped forward, their minds already intertwining. As the Admiral's face appeared on the console, Charles spoke, his voice resonating with a depth that surprised even him. Admiral, we're ready to coordinate. What's your strategy? Admiral Vex's eyes widened slightly at Charles's changed appearance, but he quickly composed himself. We need to form a defensive perimeter. Our smaller ships are vulnerable to their long-range weapons. Uma's skin pulsed with vibrant colors as she processed the information. In a matter of seconds, she had translated the complex Arcturian battle plans into terms the human crew could understand. Captain Thompson, she said, turning to face the human commander, we recommend positioning the Curiosity here. Her hand swept across the tactical display, leaving a trail of bioluminescent light that mapped out the optimal formation. Thompson nodded, impressed. Make it so, he ordered. As the battle unfolded, Charles and Uma became the nerve center of the Allied fleet. Their enhanced abilities allowed them to process and relay information at an unprecedented speed. Through their telepathic link, they provided real-time updates to all ships, enabling swift and precise maneuvers that minimized damage from the Voidborn attacks. Harmonizer vessel deploying advanced shields, Charles announced, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as he interpreted the data streaming through his mind. Dr. Lyra is transmitting adaptation protocols. Uma's skin rippled with excitement. We can modify our shields, but it will take time. Captain Thompson frowned. Time we don't have. The Voidborn are pressing their attack. Suddenly, alarms blared across the command center. A young ensign's voice cut through the chaos. Sir, we're detecting a Voidborn boarding party on the Arcturian flagship. Charles and Uma exchanged a glance, their shared consciousness already formulating a plan. Captain, Charles said, we volunteer to join the response team. Thompson hesitated, clearly torn between the need for their coordinating abilities and the potential advantage their enhanced physiology could provide against the boarders. Very well, he said finally, but be careful. We need you both in one piece. As they made their way to the shuttle bay, Charles and Uma found Dr. Chen waiting for them, her face set with perseverance. "I'm coming with you," she said, hefting a strange-looking device. "This harmonizer tech might give us an edge." The journey to the Arcturian flagship was tense and silent. As they docked and made their way through the alien corridors, Charles marveled at how easily he could now interpret the Arcturian design aesthetics. It was as if his brain had been rewired to understand both human and Arcturian perspectives simultaneously. Uma suddenly froze, her skin pulsing with an alarming pattern of colors. "There," she whispered, pointing down a seemingly empty hallway. "I can sense them." Charles focused, and to his surprise, he could detect subtle changes in the air composition and electromagnetic fields. "You're right," he said. "They're using some kind of cloaking technology." Dr. Chen activated her device, which emitted a low hum. "This should disrupt their cloaking," she explained. As if on cue, the air shimmered, revealing several towering, shadowy figures. The void-born boarders turned towards them, their featureless faces somehow conveying menace. Uma's body began to glow, emitting pulses of dazzling bioluminescence. The void-born recoiled, their movements becoming erratic. "It's disorienting them," Charles realized. He concentrated, drawing on his newfound connection to Uma's biology, and felt a similar energy building within him. With a thought, he released a burst of light that amplified Uma's effect. The combined bioluminescent assault gave the human and Arcturian security teams the opening they needed. Stun beams and energy weapons fired in a coordinated barrage, dropping the void-born boarders one by one. As the last intruder fell, Charles and Uma found themselves face-to-face with Admiral Vex. The Arcturian leader's stern expression had softened, replaced by something approaching respect. "Your actions have saved many lives today," Vex said, his voice gruff but sincere. Before they could respond, Dr. Chen's communicator crackled to life. Dr. Lyra's voice came through, tense and urgent. "The Voidborn are launching a final assault on our vessel. Our shields are failing. We have a weapon that could end this, but we need perfect synchronization with your ships to use it." Charles and Uma shared a look of understanding. "We have an idea," Charles said, addressing both Admiral Vex and the distant Dr. Lyra. "But it's risky." Uma nodded, her skin pulsing with a mix of dedication and apprehension. "We can interface directly with the harmonizer systems, create a living bridge between all three species' technologies." Admiral Vex's eyes widened. "The strain on your systems?" "We understand the risks," Charles interrupted, "but it's our best chance." After a moment of tense silence, Vex nodded. "Very well. Make it happen." As they raced back to the harmonizer vessel, Charles could feel the battle raging around them. The fate of three species hung in the balance, and he and Uma were about to put themselves at the very center of it all. The harmonizer ship loomed before them, its sleek design pulsing with nearly unleashed energy. As they stepped aboard, Dr. Lyra greeted them, her serene demeanor belied by the tension in her eyes. "Are you certain about this?" she asked as she led them to the ship's core. Charles and Uma exchanged a glance, their hands intertwining. "We're ready," they said in unison. As they approached the pulsing heart of the harmonizer vessel, Charles felt a mix of anticipation and fear. Whatever happened next would change everything. For them, for their species, and for the future of the galaxy itself. As Charles and Uma approached the core of the harmonizer vessel, the air hummed with energy. Dr. Lyra guided them to a circular platform surrounded by pulsating crystals. "This is where you'll interface with our systems," Dr. Lyra explained. "Are you prepared?" Charles took a deep breath, squeezing Uma's hand. "As ready as we'll ever be." They stepped onto the platform, and instantly a surge of energy coursed through their bodies. Charles gasped as his mind expanded, connecting with the ship's systems. He could feel Uma beside him, their consciousnesses intertwining in a way that transcended their previous bond. Together they became a living conduit, linking the technologies of three species into a unified whole. Information flowed through them at an incomprehensible rate. Charles saw battle formations, shield frequencies, and weapon systems all at once. With their combined will, they directed the Allied fleet's movements with perfect precision. Ships danced in intricate patterns, their shields harmonizing to create an impenetrable defense. The void-born attacks, once so devastating, now glanced harmlessly off the synchronized barrier. But the strain was immense. Charles felt as if his body was being torn apart and remade with each passing second. Uma's skin flickered wildly, her bioluminescence pulsing in chaotic patterns. "Hold on," Charles gasped, his voice barely audible over the hum of energy. Uma's response came not in words, but in a wave of grit and love that washed over him. As one, they unleashed the full power of the harmonizer weapon. A pulse of energy, more felt than seen, rippled across space. The void-born ships shuddered, their systems overwhelmed by the harmonized assault. In a matter of moments, it was over. The void-born fleet, once a terrifying force, now drifted powerless in the void. Charles and Uma collapsed, their bodies smoking from the energy surge. The last thing Charles saw before losing consciousness was Dr. Chen rushing towards them, her face a mix of concern and awe. He awoke to the soft beeping of medical equipment. His body felt strange, simultaneously familiar and alien. As his eyes focused, he saw Uma in the bed next to him, her form shimmering with subtle changes. Dr. Chen appeared at his bedside, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. "Charles, how do you feel?" He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a melodic hum. Startled, he looked down at his hands, seeing patches of bioluminescent skin pulsing in rhythm with his thoughts. "Remarkable," Dr. Chen murmured, scanning him with a device. "Your cellular structure is still in flux. It seems the interface with the harmonizer technology has triggered further changes in both of you." Over the next weeks, Charles and Uma underwent a series of treatments and tests in the specialized medical bay. Dr. Chen worked tirelessly alongside Dr. Zile, an Arcturian biologist, and Dr. Lyra to stabilize their rapidly evolving physiology. Charles watched in fascination as his body incorporated aspects of Arcturian biology. His skin developed the ability to change color and texture, while his muscles became denser and more efficient. At the same time, he retained his human features, creating a unique blend of both species. Uma underwent similar changes, her form becoming more human-like in structure while retaining her Arcturian abilities. Their mental link deepened, allowing them to communicate without words and share sensory experiences. As their conditions stabilized, Charles and Uma began to explore their new abilities. They discovered enhanced strength, accelerated healing, and a deeper connection to the technology around them. One morning, as they practiced modulating their bioluminescent patterns, a message arrived from Admiral Vex. A historic summit was being convened aboard the Harmonizer vessel to discuss the future of the alliance between humans, Arcturians, and Harmonizers. "They want us to attend," Uma said, her skin rippling with excitement. Charles nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "We're living proof of what's possible when our species come together. But I wonder how others will react to us now." As they made their way to the summit, Charles couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed them. Some looked on with awe, others with trepidation. He took Uma's hand, drawing strength from their connection. The summit chamber was a vast, circular room filled with representatives from all three species. Admiral Vex, Captain Thompson, and Dr. Lyra sat at a central table, flanked by their respective delegations. As Charles and Uma entered, a hush fell over the room. Admiral Vex stood, his stern features softening slightly. "Charles, Uma, please join us. Your unique perspective will be invaluable in these discussions." They took their seats, acutely aware of the eyes upon them. As the summit began, it quickly became clear that integrating the three species would be no easy task. Cultural misunderstandings and biological incompatibilities threatened to derail the process at every turn. During a particularly heated debate over resource allocation, Charles felt a surge of frustration from Uma. Without thinking, he reached out with his mind, creating a telepathic link between the human and Arcturian representatives. Suddenly, the arguing parties fell silent, their eyes widening in surprise. Charles realized he had somehow allowed them to experience each other's perspectives directly. "Incredible," the human representative breathed. I understand now. Your needs are different from ours, but equally valid." The Arcturian nodded, his skin pulsing with newfound empathy. And your concerns are not rooted in greed, as I had assumed, but in a genuine need for your people's survival. As the summit continued, Charles and Uma found themselves acting as mediators, using their unique abilities to bridge gaps in understanding. Their presence served as a living example of the potential benefits of integration. When the discussions turned to the future of interspecies cooperation, Charles and Uma exchanged a glance. It was time to share the idea they had been developing during their recovery. Charles stood, his skin shimmering with a mix of tenacity and hope. "We have a proposal," he began, his voice resonating with a new harmonic quality. "An interspecies exchange program where volunteers undergo a modified version of the transformation we experienced." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Uma joined Charles, her form a striking blend of human and Arcturian features. This program would allow individuals from each species to truly understand one another, fostering deeper cooperation and shared innovation. The proposal sparked intense debate. Some embraced the idea enthusiastically, while others expressed concerns about the loss of their species' unique identities. As arguments flew back and forth, Charles and Uma stood firm, answering questions and addressing fears with patience and understanding. Finally, after hours of discussion, a compromise was reached. A pilot program would be established, allowing a small number of volunteers to undergo a limited version of the transformation process. As the summit concluded, Charles and Uma found themselves at the center of a new initiative that promised to reshape the future of galactic relations. The path ahead was uncertain, but as they looked at each other, their bioluminescent patterns synchronizing in a display of shared purpose, they knew they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The real work was just beginning, and the universe watched with held breath to see what this unprecedented alliance would bring.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.